Hello and good morning. We do have a good crowd here today. We're thankful for you, thankful for the opportunity we have to be together, to assemble together, and to worship our God in heaven. We're so grateful for you. We're especially grateful to Him for this new day, for this new week, and now for this time to worship. We're going to be in Romans chapter 12. We'll begin in verse 9 in just a moment. The text that Brother Ted read for us, we'll get there shortly. You know, even though more and more financial transactions are happening more in the online realm with direct deposit from an employer to an account, and then maybe you spend that money on a card or even spend it online digitally, even though that's still the case or growing, it's still the case that that's backed by cash, by currency. Those funds are still represented by legitimate real cash. And so counterfeit money is still as big a, quote, business as it's ever been. You travel internationally and you would find that the $100 bill, the American $100 bill, is the most counterfeited piece of money in the entire world. It's relatively easy to counterfeit, and it's very attractive, no matter where you live, to be able to use American currency for exchange, especially if it's for nefarious purposes. But we shift our attention to our borders. Domestically, it's not the $100 bill, but instead it's actually the $20 bill that's most counterfeited and distributed within our own country, because it's used far more often than the $100 bill. And so it's much less risky to use something that's common like the 20. And you take the other common bills like the 10 or the 5 or the 1, and it's far more profit for the counterfeiters to do it with a 20. So just imagine the frustrations and the difficulties that happen when someone gets a hold of a counterfeit $20 bill. They try to spend it at a store, and the marker reveals, hey, this is not real, this is fake. We cannot accept it. Well, I was going to pay for my lunch with this, but now I can't. I have to do something else. Or I go to the bank and I make a deposit, and it's a $100 deposit. And they call you back and they say, hey, you made a $100 deposit, but 2 of these bills were counterfeit. We can only add $60 to your account. So that's frustrating. That's a headache when we try to use something that's not genuine as if it were. For the sake of illustration and to connect to our purposes in this lesson and in this study for today and next week, imagine you're at home and you get a knock on your door, and it's an executive from your bank. It's the FBI alongside them, and you open the door and they say, listen, you're not in trouble, we're not here to arrest you. But there is a problem, a major problem. We've done some tracking and some investigating, and there's this ring that's happened over the past several decades, and you've been affected, you've been impacted. What we figured out is the cash that you use for the down payment on your house is actually tied to counterfeit funds. The majority of the payments that you've been making over the years, we've tracked them, and you had no clue. You were not a part of it, but it was still tied to counterfeit funds. And so now, what you assumed belonged to you, in fact, doesn't. We've got a problem we have to resolve. Can you imagine the helplessness, the hopelessness that we would feel if that were to happen? It's not going to happen that way, but just imagine for the sake of illustration, what would that be like? So when it comes to our homes in the spiritual sense, what happens? Is it possible that we could build a home and it not be built on the love of God and from the love of God? Is it possible we could think this is love, think this is what we ought to do, and yet it's not from God? We're taking Romans chapter 12, and we're trying to learn what the principles are there about being full of love, transformed lives, and we're trying our best to also apply them to our homes. This is the holidays, and there's no place like home. There's especially no place like home for the holidays. We want to do our best in a time that can be difficult and painful in our homes to turn our attention toward God, the God who designed the home, who shows us how to build the home and the family His way, and learn that no matter our role, we have a path and a role within that home of using the mercies of God to then express the love of God to one another. And so that's how he's going to begin in chapter 12 and verse 9 of our text, is to show us the importance of authentic, genuine love, as it is different from counterfeit love. Now, what we're saying in terms of our emphasis in the first 2 verses of this chapter, are that we want to have, in terms of our focus on the home, we want to have an upward focus. We want our home to be guided by the mercies of God, but also an inward responsibility. We're to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. As my body, you offer your body. We're going to renew our minds. I'm going to renew my mind, you're going to renew your mind. And it's that inward personal responsibility that's going to get us distraction going forward that God would have us to do. And that's the third one, is a forward direction. God says you're not to be hardened from the outside in by the world, but instead be transformed inwardly that works its way out. We're looking forward and thinking forward. It's because of the mercies of God that we now have this promise that as our lives are transformed, so too our homes can be and will be transformed as well. So as we think about the importance of love and true, authentic love, chapter 12, verses 9 through 13 bring us to that focus. Let's read together, beginning verse 9. Let love be genuine. You hear it? Authentic. The Ted read from the New King James. It's without hypocrisy. So let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. And seek to show hospitality. Let's look at this first idea and even the main idea, which is to let love be genuine. What's the point here? The point is we must pursue love which is authentic or genuine. Now, in the original Greek, it's just two words, love genuine, or love without hypocrisy. We understand, and it's unanimous, the understanding is that it's a Greek way of giving a command. But here's the noun, love, and it's adjective without hypocrisy or be genuine and authentic. What he's saying here is there's a type of love that is true and real, and you must be sure that your love is that. So genuine, as we've said, means without hypocrisy. The root of that word has to do with an actor, a stage actor who will go on stage and they'll change costumes, they'll change masks, they'll change their roles, they'll change their voice. That's what a hypocrite is, one who will change faces and change what they're doing based on the situation. Well, he says your love must be without that. It's anti that. It's not an actor. It's not putting on. It's not changing. So I heard an interview with a TV producer, or TV director, and he was overseeing this show, and they were filming on location in Texas. Not on a set, but on location. And so they had a scene where a couple of characters needed to go inside a jewelry store and purchase some jewelry. And the runners and the producers of the show said, hey, we've got these 3 or 4 ladies we're going to bring in and let them try out, audition for the role of the jewelry store owner. And the director said, no, I don't want them. If we're going to pay the jewelry store to film in their shop, I want to pay the owner of the jewelry store to play the part. And he said, she did what we could have never trained an actress to do. She just interacted with these two characters as if they were buying jewelry. I want the real experience on film, he said. I don't want somebody acting and portraying. Well, that's what Paul is saying true love is. True love is not having to pretend, not having to rehearse, not having to put on an outward face. It doesn't change based on the circumstances. In fact, it's always the same. Now, here's why that's the case. It's because it's agape love. And we know that agape love only comes from God. Let love be genuine. Let this kind of love be authentic, because the only source of this kind of love is God himself. We've heard from time to time about the different types of love and the Greek words for those. You see a couple of other ones mentioned in the very next verse number 10. But agape love finds its theological depth and meaning only in the time and the people of God. Right before Christ came on the scene, the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, began to use this word over and over about the love of God, agape. And then Jesus comes on the scene and establishes the gospel in the church, and then we find this word agape used over and over about God's love and Christ's love for us, and it's this type of love we were to have for each other. And so he says, let your agape be authentic. Now, what he's done up to this point, Romans chapters 1 through 11, he's used the word several times. In all cases, except for 8 verse 28, it's always been about God's love toward us. He is the standard for knowing what love toward one another is to be. So, for instance, Romans chapter 5, we are not put to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts. See, the way we overcome fear and shame is through the powerful love of God. Romans 5 verse 8, just a few verses later, God demonstrates, shows his own love toward us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And then the end of chapter 8 of Romans, I'm convinced, Paul says, nothing shall ever separate us from the love of God through Christ Jesus our Lord. So God's love is flowing toward us in the likeness of Christ, the death of Christ, the suffering of Christ. And now he says, let your love, let your agape be authentic and genuine. How are we going to know if it's real or not? Well, it's going to go back to the source. So it's almost as if there's a turning point in Romans when you look at the uses of this word love. Because here he says, chapter 12, let your love be genuine. Later in chapter 13, he's going to say, owe no one anything except to love one another. In chapter 14, he's going to say, some of you are not walking in love. You're ignoring your brothers and your sisters in Christ. You're just eating and drinking whatever you want, and you're forgetting that they have a conscience, that they've come out of this pagan world, and you're just offending them right and left. You're not walking in love. And so he's saying, take the love of God, look at it, learn from it in the likeness of Christ, and you allow that to be authentic. Now, do you see how that makes some sense in the text with this phrase, let love be genuine? We can't make genuine love. We can't create genuine love. It's not up to us to figure out what that is. It's up to us to learn it from God and thus begin to show it to our spouses, and to our children, to our parents, to extended family members as well. Now you'll see this concept of going to God as the source. That's throughout this little passage we've taken on to study this morning. Because he says, verse 11, serve the Lord. And it's only through serving the Lord that we can find him as the source of love. It's only because of him that we also are able to rejoice in our hope, that we're able to find that patience, to maintain that patience and faithfulness during turmoil and difficult times. We must remain constant and steadfast in prayer because of this connection we have in God through Christ. And so as we think about this principle of knowing the true source of love is God and thus letting it be authentic, think about how the home is always intended to be a source and a place of learning, a training ground. It's not just for children, because we're always to be learning and always transformed. Chapter 12, verse 2. We're living with our spouse, we're living with our children, we're living with our parents, and no matter the relationship, we're always learning and growing together because of how God designed us to accept one another as family. That now becomes the environment in which we put into practice the things we keep learning. When the home is full of the mercies of God and we're teaching and we're studying and we're learning the mercies of God, it's there that we keep learning what the love of God is and thus able to put it into practice more and more. So think about the home, no matter our age, no matter our season of life, as the training ground for implementing what is coming from God, the true, authentic love of God. But next, we need to notice something important in the text. When we have this authentic love, and it's what our home is built on and built from, we will know what we are against. We will know what we are against. Now that sounds a little odd sometimes because you'll have some progressive voices that'll say, well, you know, if you're truly loving, you're not against anything. You have to just accept everything. Love is wide open and it's tolerant and it just accepts. And yet, God is love. And some of the texts that reveal to us that is true, God makes it clear he's also against some things. So Exodus 34, for example, verses 6 and 7, God says he is abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. He keeps steadfast love from generation to generation. And that's immediately after the whole golden calf incident. And then immediately following that, though, God says he will not clear the guilty. He will remember the iniquity of the fathers for future generations. God is a 100% always love. He's overflowing with steadfast love, and yet he is against sin. He is against our hard-heartedness. And so to be a home that's full of the love of God, the authentic love of God, means we'll be against some things. 1 John chapter 4, a couple of times in that passage, you find it said, God is love. And yet it's also clear, God is against us not loving our brethren. If we say we love God, but we don't love our brother, if we hate our brother, he says we are a liar. God is against us abusing his love. He is against us being two-faced and hypocritical as it relates to love. So when we are full of his love, we will be against some things also. So notice in the text, two things he specifically calls out as saying we are to be against. The first is in verse number 9, abhor what is evil. Hate the things that are evil. Things that are against the will of God, we are to hate. If we're going to be in the love of God, we're going to hate the things that do not come from God. It's a strong word. Hate, detest, be absolutely against things that are evil. What we find is in the New Testament, there is an emphasis on hating sin while also loving those who have fallen victim to sin. So Jude, final few verses of that little book. Have mercy on those who doubt. Save others by snatching them out of the fire. To others show mercy with fear. 3 different categories of love toward people. But then, the final phrase, hating even the garment stained by the flesh. You hear that? Jude is not saying that we begin to associate other people, and it's guilt by association, that we turn off and we turn away and we cut off and we're rude to people. He is saying we cannot stand and we abhor and we cut off sin. We hate that which even contacts sin. True, authentic love cannot and will not tolerate evil. Remember the command of chapter 12 and verse number 2? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds. The first step to being conformed by the world is not to welcome it, it's not to celebrate it. The first step is to stop hating evil. When we begin to stop hating it, that opens the door for then accepting it and welcoming it and beginning to celebrate it. So he says here, let your love be genuine, and you cut off, and you cannot imagine allowing sin to remain. So how does that apply to the home? Let's think literally first here about our house. Let's suppose you've got neighbors, and one by one, the neighbors further from you, but increasingly closer to you, are victimized by a burglar. And it's clear all the signs are the same. It's the same person. It's the same set of circumstances, same things being stolen. And you decide, this guy's not going to rob my house, burglarize my house. He's not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And so you get armed, and you get a security system that's increased and advanced, and you get the police on watch out, and you get the best security system. And you say, once and for all, it's not coming in here. It will not happen here. Now, spiritually, that's the approach we should take. Evil and sin will not enter this house and remain. We're going to be patient. We're going to love. But we're not going to tolerate evil. But then notice what happens. Because it stops with us, where else does it stop? We stop the spread. It's not just that we say, I'm going to be selfish and cut off my house. We're saying, this is what God gives me control over. And so in my house, in my family, we're not going to celebrate these things. We're not going to allow them to continue in our own lives. We're going to help each other through them and over them. We're not going to just let them happen, turn a blind eye to them. We're not going to celebrate them when they come in over the internet or over TV. We're going to abhor what's evil. There's a second thing, though, he says in the text that we are against, and that is settling for slothful faith. Don't be slothful in your zeal. Don't be lazy as it relates to your fervent energy for the Lord. Don't let your enthusiasm and energy be subject to sloth and laziness. We cannot reconcile a presumptive, slothful disposition while also claiming to love God and to love others. It was Jesus' parable, Matthew 25, where he gives those 3 different levels of opportunities or of money in the text. The master does. And the 1-talent man comes and he says, I hid it, I kept it, I didn't do anything with it, but I didn't lose it either. And I did it all because I was afraid of you. And the master calls that servant, you wicked and slothful servant. See, that 1-talent man would try to say to the master, listen, I didn't do anything. And he wanted to be praised for not doing anything. And yet the master is saying, and Jesus is saying, you did do something. You exercised laziness. You exercised presumption that you didn't have to do anything, that you didn't have to risk anything. You knew who I was, and yet you didn't act on what you were given by me. And so since it's presumptive, it's disrespectful to misuse and neglect physical blessings or to misuse and neglect time, how much worse is it to be given the mercies of God and to remain slothful and inactive spiritually, to not have the spiritual drive to do the work of the Lord? we again tie this to the home. We would look and we would see a character aspect, a work ethic. And these are just kind of stereotypical things that come to mind. And I'm thinking more about the work ethic even more than the skills themselves. But you take a young man who knows how to dig a hole, who knows how to work on the farm, who knows how to work in the yard. Well, where did he learn that? Was he born that way? He just come out of the womb and all of a sudden he just has a work ethic? He knows how to take apart a car engine and replace parts and fix cars. He knows how to practice his sport and get better and work hard. Does he just come out knowing that? Or did he see that and witness that drive and that intensity and that commitment to practice and getting better somewhere, and thus he learned himself how to have that drive and that fervency? We can do the same with young ladies, of course, learning from their mothers and their grandmothers. We look and we see, hey, they have a good work ethic. They must have been raised by people or influenced by people who modeled that for them. So where does slothful zeal come from? How do we grow lazy when spiritual things? It's because we probably are dwelling in a home that tolerates that and allows that to happen. We don't hold one another accountable. We don't lift one another up in the directions of working spiritually. So he says, don't be slothful in zeal. Be against that laziness. Okay, third idea. Obviously, the rest is things that we are before. We know what we're against. We're going to cut off evil. We're not going to be satisfied with just being lazy. We also know exactly what we're doing, what we are going to be for. So you look at verse number 9 and verse 11, you see that in the instances of the two negatives, he follows those immediately with the positive. Don't allow evil, abhor evil, hold fast to that which is good. Don't be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit. What does it mean to hold fast to that which is good? It means you identify and you know what's good. It's crucial here we don't mistake our role in this. We don't get to decide what good is. We don't decide what love is, neither do we decide what good is. We find that which is good from God. It's that which meets its purpose. And then we hold on to it. Paul would say much the same in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 21. Test everything. You run everything through the sieve, and you hold fast to what is good, and you abstain from every form of evil. You cling on to, you hold on to that which is good, and then you reject everything that's not good. Last week I asked Rick about hanging something at my house, like how would I go about doing that? It's just not something I've ever thought about or tried to do before in this instance. And so he gave me a couple of quick suggestions, and then you could probably tell me what his next words were. Find the stud and drill you a hole. Just basic common sense advice when you're hanging stuff, right? You first find the stud in the wall, and it's there that you drill your hole and you latch the thing you're hanging into it. That's the same principle Paul's talking about here. You find what is good, and you don't let go of it. You rest your life and your faith and your faithfulness on that which comes from God and which is good. But then he also says you be fervent in spirit. Don't be slothful in zeal, but you let your life boil over in the things of God. When you know it's good, when you're coming from the mercies of God, when you're letting your love be genuine, you let that boil over in your life constantly. The idea behind the word fervent has to do with the sound that boiling water makes. You know, you can't really set a timer easily to know when water's going to boil. It depends on a lot of different factors. But when you leave a pot of water to boil, you can hear it when it begins to roll. Let your spirit be that way. It's obvious that you're living for the Lord, and your spirit is boiling over constantly because you're serving the Lord. But then there's three things that happen also in the text, and they're all action-oriented. Number one, love one another with brotherly affection. When you look at verses 9 and 10 together, you see all three Greek words that are defined as love. You see all three used in those two verses. Agape, verse 9, and then you see storge, phileo, and then Philadelphia in verse number 10. Love one another with brotherly affection. So you treat one another like family in the church, verse number 10. You actively treat each other because you recognize God has made you family. God's brought you together as brothers. And so there's this active aspect for genuine love. You can't just say, I feel this way. Likewise, outdo one another in showing honor. There's some discrepancy there about the translation, but generally the idea is You be active. If you're going to be, quote, competitive about anything, it's going to be about showing each other honor and respect, courtesy. What do you celebrate? Do you celebrate and honor things as much as you criticize and critique and nitpick and nag? Honor. Show one another that honor. But then also contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Participate in finding needs. That means when I'm in need, I can't pay my bills, or I can't eat, or I can't get out of the house, I can't go pick up my medicine. We have the confidence someone in the church is able to come help us and will come help us, contribute to the needs of the saints. What we need to be careful about doing is not equating both of these phrases in verse number 13 as the same. Contributing to the needs of the saints is generally a different thing than seeking hospitality. The idea behind hospitality extends far beyond the church. The root of the idea of hospitality literally means a friend of strangers. Has the root of xenophobia, fear of a different culture or different peoples. What he's saying is, you take care of one another in the church, contribute to the needs of the saints. And when there are those who are not among you, you also are seeking opportunities as the church to be a friend of theirs. You're looking to meet their needs, to serve them, to be hospitable to them, because you're letting your light shine in a way that Jesus lived his own life. So think about now what he's saying. Take all that you've been given, and you love one another with brotherly affection. You honor and lift up each other, and then when there are needs that are lacking, you meet those needs. And that extends even to those you don't know, because of the love of God. So now, how does that matter in the home? That means that we're taking these actions. It's not just a feeling. You can't build a church on feelings. You can't build a home on feelings. Feelings follow action. So let love be genuine demands that we live out those things with service, with giving, with feeding, with cooking. Now think about how that impacts the home. Where do we learn those things? We're loving each other within the home. We're learning those skills. We're learning to see with those eyes toward others. But then we also get to reach out and to exercise those things as the home. We're going to go serve the needs of saints in the church. We're stumbling upon opportunities as a family and as a home to make a difference in the community with those who are not necessarily those who love the Lord. We're able to bump into strangers and serve their needs as a family. So now what begins to happen is a totally different degree beyond what we talked about earlier. We can put a stop to sin through our home. It's not going to go here, therefore it's going to slow it down. It's not going to continue on past us and through us. Well, now when we have homes that participate in meeting needs, that bend down and to serve and to give to the needy, we have homes that will find a way to love strangers, love those who are different from us. When we have homes who are truly living out that authentic love, it begins to spread that authentic love of God to a world that needs it so desperately. It's fundamental we'll do these within the home, but it's also imperative that we begin to do these things as the home, alongside those in the church, to be able to make a difference in this world. So just as homes and families are in prime position to stop the spread of evil, to stop the spread of wickedness, so too we are equipped to start the spread of true godly love that so many need. This morning, as we consider the nature of true love, knowing it only comes from God, are you in that true love of His? Have you responded to His love? Are you a part of His family? Is He the hope of your own life, and is He the hope of your home and your family? If you cannot say that with confidence this morning, please change that. Please respond to His love. Put Him on, put Christ on in baptism this morning, where He promises to save and to forgive. If you know that you've not been being transformed, you've not been living in that love, and you've not let that love live through you, then you can change your life again this day. He promises to forgive you. We promise to be with you and help you and pray with you as well. If you have those needs, please know we're here. Would you come as we sing?